Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Hamasho Borona Gara Sole Natural Processed Ethiopia from Big Sur Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Big Sur, based out of Shanghai, China. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel on several occasions, having reviewed 3 of their coffees earlier this year. We picked this coffee up from Airworks as part of one of their special releases, and I was very excited to see that Airworks was bringing Big Sur back in, as we did have some great results with both of the wash processed mejorados that we had reviewed from them. As a result, I was much more willing to branch out with the coffees that we did pick up from them this time around, including this natural processed Ethiopian coffee, making it our first ever natural from Big Sur. So it'll be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 54. The recipe we went with for this coffee was a higher extraction one at a 17:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which usually indicates a more medium fine grind. However, we also went a little bit more fine on that grind as well. Now, roast profile for this coffee, Big Sur is marketed as being one of the lightest roasting coffee roasters in China, which is definitely the case for us, as a lot of people have said that they're on par with, if not maybe a little lighter than Gut & Co., which is also a very light roasting Chinese-based coffee roaster. As far as it goes for us, they definitely do skew on the extremely light side of things relative to the other Chinese-based coffee roasters that we have reviewed on this channel. Even with this one being a more processed coffee, you can still tell based off of some of the characteristics of this coffee. And while it may not necessarily be the lightest coffee roaster in the world, it still does kind of hold its own in comparison to some of those other lighter roasting coffee roasters. So for that reason, we can say that this one does skew on the very light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 28, first impression through the V60, and to my surprise, the coffee was a fair bit more tame than expected, as it is relatively clean and fruit forward, while simultaneously lacking the expected level of intensity. Traditional berry qualities and some complementary lighter sugary fruit sweetness to it, but it definitely feels like there's significantly more to be had from this one based off of this first impression. So as a result, it was just an okay start, and I'll be completely honest, I was a little let down by the experience of this coffee given how high our expectations were for this coffee roaster going into this one. But again, first impression, so we'll see where it goes from here. As on day 31, we opted for the Chemex, and the coffee was a little bit better this time around, as it was slightly cleaner while offering a bit more intensity to it in the fruit sense. Expectedly fruit forward more so this time around, with the majority of the sweetness coming in a lighter sugary fruit sense yet again, but also a little bit of the listed blueberry in abundance as well. So this one was better, but this coffee, as of these first couple of impressions, was moderately fruit forward, but outside of that, there wasn't too much depth to this one. I continue to feel like this coffee would open up from this point going forward. Day 34. Through the FO brewer, and the coffee is not quite as impressive as either of the previous days, as it has a little bit of inconsistency to it, offering plenty of the fruit intensity yet again, this time in a slightly more sugary citric sense. Other than that, the coffee remains more berry forward with a little less cleanliness in comparison to those earlier days. Day 37 through the V60 with some higher extraction adjustments, so we did decide to push this coffee, especially given that it had been a little tame based off some of the earlier impressions, and the coffee was by far the best that it had been to this point, as it's offering a significantly more fruit forward experience, all of which still presented in a cleaner sense. And that was my concern pushing this coffee, was that it might unsettle the structure of this one, but to my surprise, it held up very well when being pushed. Blueberry qualities were relatively more abundant, with a finish in a more sweeter sugary stone fruit sense, as well as some citric qualities, lending itself towards a lovely experience all around. And one of the main reasons why I enjoyed Big Sur the first time around was because both of those mejorados were very sweet and fruit forward, and I was really hoping that the natural processed coffee that we did have from them would also yield those results, and that's what happened here, as we got a lot of those fruit qualities to it in a very clean and well-defined sense. So very happy with the way that day 37 mark turned out. Day 40 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it's not quite as good as the previous day, as it's offering a little less fruit sweetness and clarity, still primarily skewing in the berry fruit sense with a little bit more tame of an experience in comparison. So it's still solid nonetheless, but the previous day had set the bar very high for what we could experience from this coffee. day 43 through the V60 with some lower extraction adjustments. And the coffee is nice, but it seemed to perform better when being pushed, as it feels like it's lacking a little bit overall. There is still plenty of the fruit sweetness, as it has held up pretty well in terms of the clarity throughout. So it's been a very nice day once again, but I really just seem to appreciate the way that this coffee did turn out when we were going a little bit heavier on the extraction for it. Day 46 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and it's another great fruit forward day. It's one of the better days that we'd experienced of the Chemex, as it's offering a little bit more of a blueberry feel and a more prominent, sweeter citric quality in line with the listed orange. This one was a pretty straightforward experience in days, so I do have a theory that maybe going a little lower in the extraction with the Chemex seems to help, but pushing this coffee with the V60 seems to help with the most, which is why on day 50 we went back to the V60 with those higher extraction adjustments, and the coffee was back to being at its very best, as there's a slight cost of what feels like a little bit of a wine-like brightness, which, yeah, that's a huge sticking point to me. However, it really didn't seem to hinder the coffee as much as I might have expected, as it's made up for with a beautifully fruit-forward finish that's reminiscent of what I would describe as being grape and blueberry gushers, as it has that intense sweetness to it, and it's very well defined and articulated, so I really appreciated that characteristic of this coffee. Plenty of sweeter citric qualities in stone fruit, in line with both the listed orange and apricot, and a slight spiced clove with plenty of the perfumey floral, lavender, and violet characteristics. So this is much more in line with what I was expecting from this coffee going into it. A little bit of, we'll go with funk to it or fermentiness to it, but it was definitely worth the trade-off given just how intense of a fruit forward experience it was. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have a lot of level 4s in this one, so let's go through those. We will start with the finish, level 4. The finish of this coffee is easily my favorite part of it, given that it does have that lingering, long-lasting, fruit-forward quality throughout the entirety of it. It didn't matter which day we brewed this coffee. On some of the earlier days, it maybe wasn't the most intense, but at the very end, it still did seem to settle in a more fruit-forward experience. And even on that final day, when we notated a couple of other descriptors of this coffee, it still finished in a fruit-forward sense. So for me, very happy with the way that this coffee did finish. Wasn't too intense or overbearing whatsoever. It was never in jeopardy of being too intense or overbearing. Level 4, perfect place for that. Sweetness, level 4. I'm always going to be very happy when the sweetness does come in a very fruit forward sense. As I had that description of being reminiscent of gushers, which is something that I still enjoy to this day, a kind of guilty pleasure snack, but it was very well defined in that sense with a wonderful level of sweetness to it. So very happy with a higher level of sweetness to this one, consistent with what I was either hoping for or expecting from this coffee roaster. Acidity, level 4. So the final day when we brewed it, I mentioned a little bit of that wine-like acidity, that wine-like brightness, and right at the forefront, it is a little bit bothersome and a little bit troublesome, but I'm more than willing to get over it given just how beautifully this coffee does transition. I think if more coffees had that as opposed to being very like wine acidic forward and then carrying that throughout all the way in the finish and then maybe just skyrocketing even more so in the finish, I'd probably enjoy those coffees more, but this one right here, having a very abundant fruit forward finish, makes up for the fact that it can be just a little boozy at the forefront when pushed. Florality, level 4, I mentioned a couple of things, lavender and violet, a lot of classic characteristics that you'd expect for a natural processed Ethiopian coffee, given that it has that very blue-purple feel to it. Although I think that this coffee was maybe intended to be a little bit more on that kind of yellow-orange intense fruit quality for this one. Berry fruit, level 4. Plenty of grape, plenty of blueberry. Grape can be a bit of a sticking point to me when it comes to natural processed Ethiopian coffees, natural processed coffees in general, largely because they're a dime a dozen. Usually that's the most abundant characteristic that I do get from a coffee, but this one being a little bit unique in the way that it did present itself certainly seemed to help, so I'm more than okay with this one being at level 4 in terms of the berry fruit qualities to it. A lot of people might even say that this one has a blueberry bomb sort of experience, because I can certainly see that, especially in the way that this coffee does finish. Citrus fruit, level 4. So they do have that orange note listed on there, and there might have been a little bit of a priming effect to this one, as I continuously felt like I'm getting a little bit more orange than I probably was, but whatever citrus there was within this coffee, it did present in a sweeter sense, so that's fine with me. Citrus fruit, level 4, where we opted to put that with a more sweet quality to it in mind. Stone fruit, level 4. Usually when I get apricot, it reminds me a little bit more of something that's like a jam sort of characteristic to it. And I can also see that within this one, priming effect maybe also a little bit more at play. I say that because the most abundant quality for me for the fruit sense was the berry qualities. But that being said, I was able to get plenty of the stone fruit characteristics at times as well. I mentioned this coffee can be a little bit inconsistent. It was a little sensitive to brew. However, when we were able to get a lot of those citrus and stone fruit forward characteristics, they were pretty well defined as well. So level 4 where we opted to put both of those. Just a couple more things worth discussing. We'll go real quick to the body level 3. Definitely had plenty of texture to it, which I guess for the most part has been kind of consistent with results I've gotten from natural processed Ethiopian coffees recently. So a little bit more medium bodied overall. Final thing worth discussing, and by far the most important thing worth discussing, cleanliness level 4. I feel like if you would have told me once upon a time that we would put any coffee that had any sort of wine-like characteristic to it at a level 4 in terms of cleanliness, I would have thought that you were out of your mind. But this coffee is the exception to the rule, largely because it's there, but it's fleeting and it's not long-lasting. And as I kind of mentioned, as long as these coffees don't have that just super long-lasting and uneven wine finish to it, then I can get over the fact that it's there in a little bit of notoriety right at the forefront. But given just how beautifully well-defined and clean the finish of this coffee actually is for a natural processed coffee, have to put that caveat in there. I'm fine with the level 4 being there for the cleanliness, as I found this to be one of the cleaner natural processed coffees that we have had this year. Not too often we score a lot of natural processed coffees at the level 4 for cleanliness, but I feel like this one certainly deserved it. So yeah, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This one definitely lived up to the expectations that I did have for Big Sur going into it, as I wondered if they were, I don't want to say a one-trick pony. I was just very curious to see how the rest of their coffees would turn out, if they were also going to be super sweet and super fruit forward in the way that both of the Mejurados that we'd reviewed from them were. It is worth keeping in mind that I didn't have the best results with the other coffee that we reviewed from them. I believe it was the Miraflores, which goes to show that it hasn't been that I've universally loved everything that they've had, and that's why I really wanted to branch out. We have a couple more reviews from Big Sur coming up, and it'll be a very good kind of gauge of their offerings in general. But this one right here, this natural, was a pretty big hit for me. One of my more enjoyable natural processed coffees that we've reviewed this year, and easily one of my favorite natural processed Ethiopian coffees that we've reviewed this year as well. So I really like the way that Big Sur's coffees turn out, largely because they're sweet and fruit forward, which is everything that I'm looking for. And if they're going to be presented in a cleaner sense, that's going to be even more what I'm looking for from a coffee like this. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you're also in line with me in the way that you prefer your natural processed Ethiopian coffees to turn out, so that being on the cleaner side of things with a focus on the more berry forward aspects like this coffee was, all presented in a sweeter sense, then this one is a pretty good fit for you. Florals maybe not as abundant, brightness pretty prominent as well, so that gives it some added depth and characteristic with plenty of body. So there's a lot in this coffee that a lot of people seek with their coffees in general. So that's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Borona Gara Sole, natural processed Ethiopia from Big Sur Coffee. Thanks for watching.